A Moment That Matters with Dr. Jon Roebuck.
Good morning.
How much can a person really say in less than a minute?
I had a rather difficult experience recently.
If you're Dr. Jon Roebuck, you can communicate quite a bit.
Sometimes life throws difficult moments in our direction.
He's got 53 seconds on TV every Sunday morning to take little, everyday observations
You ever get a pack of those peanut butter crackers
and anchor them to profound notions of
there's a little
faith.
piece that just sticks to your finger and you just can't quite shake it because of the static electricity? I think our faith should be that way. That faith should cling to us stubbornly, that we can't ever...
For 15 years, Jon has preached, a minute at a time, to an audience of about 68,000 Middle Tennessee households. If you watch CBS Sunday Morning religiously, you can't miss A Moment That Matters, a dose of devotion that goes down easy and never leaves a bitter taste. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. I think for many people, a moment that matters is about as close as they get to church every week.
You know, it's funny. I do have people who will stop me and say, "You're my church on Sunday." I'm like, "Well, I'm 1 minute." And so you don't go to church much. And they go, "No, but it's enough." I'm like, I get that, right? It came about, it's really interesting. Mike Curb was a member at Woodmont when I came. He joined while I was there. And for whatever reasons, I still don't get it, Mike is a big fan, and I appreciate Mike so much.
All things come back to Mike Curb in this town.
They
don't
do.
They?
They're going to name it Curbville one day instead of Nashville maybe. But Mike had this thought that somehow my messages needed to get to a broader audience. And so we tried a little 30-minute where it was just kind of like maybe the choir piece and my sermon. We did that in Chattanooga. We did it in the Tri-Cities area for a while with Mike's money. He said, "I want you to try this." And so,
Just a video clip, right?
well, it was a 30-minute, kind of produced show
Okay.
where it was me every Sunday, but I didn't have any connection to those cities, and those people didn't know me, and it never really landed and gained any really popularity. And so, working with the guy that headed our TV ministry, a guy named John Buchanan at the time. We said, what if we started doing some spots? What if we just tried some commercial spots? And so at first we did kind of on 3 different networks. We were just trying to sort of cover all of Nashville and doing that. And again, it didn't really take off. We were getting a lot of response, but not great response. But again, it was Mike's money kind of invested in that. And then finally, Channel 5 came to us one day and they said, "Look, if you want to put all your eggs in one basket, because it's expensive, but if you want to think about CBS Sunday Morning, it's the #1 show in Nashville every Sunday." And I said, "Well, I don't know." And we went back and forth, and so we tried it, and just amazed at the exponential growth in terms of how many people saw that, how many people recognized me publicly and would stop and talk about it. And so we experimented with, I think we really made a good leap when we went from a 30-second quick spot to a full minute, because the minute gives you 53 seconds to sort of get in and introduce a thought, maybe tell a short story, and then make the application. So that's how it all began. It began with Mike's vision of wanting to do more with me and my messages. And so when I made the move from Woodmont to Belmont, I went to Mike and said, "Mike, I would love to continue these moments that matter, because we've kind of developed a brand with that and people are starting to see that. Would you be comfortable in doing that at Belmont instead of at Woodmont?" He said, "Absolutely." He said, "I want it to follow you wherever you go." So that's how it got switched over. And Belmont was delighted to do that and pick that up. And of course, we branded it with Belmont logo and stuff. And now Belmont folks do the work behind the scenes. They do the production work and all that. So.
Was Woodmont sorry to let it go?
Probably. I don't know. It's interesting. I've never really asked anyone that question, but I do think, and of course, Woodmont's still doing live TV, but I do think it was a good advertisement to continue to point people toward the Sunday morning broadcast. So it probably hurt to some degree that there wasn't that reminder midweek or late in the week.
Do you remember any of the very first ones? Or ones that were particularly resonant?
Well, one of the things that was interesting in the beginning, because it was only 30 seconds, and we were trying to do with our producer, we were trying to get, a number of them taped at a time. And so I didn't even write those ahead of time. It was like we would come up with an idea. Ad-lib all of them for maybe the first 5 or 7 years. We'd come up with an idea like, we're in a beautiful park, there's birds, and say, okay, hit it. And I'd say, part of God's creation are the birds singing, you hear the music, I'm reminded of the music of the saint, and we'd just do it off the cuff. And usually in one take, it was just sort of just a quick thing. But once it grew a little bit, you started thinking, we probably need to put a little more thought into this. And so now, especially with the minute format, you really want to get that right. So I write all those out. It's a manuscript that I write out of each one, and you've done it long enough, you know how many words it takes and what's going to fill the 53 seconds that I get. And so there's a lot of forethought to it. And one of the things that I try not to do is repeat the same theme over and over and over and over. So we look at that. We look at, is there something going on in the local community that we need to speak into? Is there an emergency? Is there a tragedy? Is there a big event? Mm-hmm. And so, and you look at the calendar, when's the Super Bowl coming up? When's the World Series? And you look for those opportunities so that it becomes, even though it's pre-taped, it has a contemporary feel to it, like a real-time type of feel to it. But
so you doing a marathon session like they do for game shows and changing your jacket and that sort of thing?
Every once in a while we try to do. I don't really want to do more than 6 at a time, 6 weeks at a time, just because you don't know what's coming out in 6 weeks. And is there something that we really need to be speaking into and something we need to be talking about that you don't know about? So sometimes I'll change my tie, but that's about it. If we do 3 or 4, sometimes we'll change the background. Like if we're facing this direction on campus, we may turn the camera and face the other direction.
Any idea how many you've done at this point? I mean, from the start at Woodmont, in the 30-second format to where you are today.
It's a great question, and I was talking to my wife about this. We're trying to kind of figure out. We think we've done them for 15 years now. So if you do 15 times 50, whatever that comes out to, the math, what is that, 2,500? I don't know.
That's why I'm a journalist. I don't do math.
I don't know. It's been a lot, though, yeah.
Have you ever rerun any?
No, we typically don't. We will sometimes archive one with the station just in case there's a glitch or an emergency comes up and something didn't happen, but the goal is to put fresh one out every week. So,
and when you're writing, do you know that they're going to hit? I mean, have you ever thought, well, that one was a dud?
It's interesting. I'll write them all typically in 1 or 2 kind of sit down, write them all out sessions, which helps you to not repeat because I just said that, and so you're writing that. There haven't been a lot of duds. Every once in a while, you'll do one and you'll think, I don't know if that really scratches a lot of itch out there. And then sometimes the ones you think don't become the one that people comment on the most. So it's kind of interesting.
Now, you have a way of finding an analogy that sometimes I think, how did this guy think of that and bring that back to Scripture, spirituality, positivity?
Yeah.
Are you always looking out there for...
Absolutely. I'm a storyteller by trade. I love telling stories, and you just sort of collect them along the way. I'll have an experience, and whether or not it's something I'm going to use immediately, but I keep a moleskin journal, and anything that kind of pops in my mind...
like a songwriter does.
I'll catch that because I know I want to come back to that. Recently, I did one a couple of weeks ago on catching a snapping turtle, fishing one day, And the idea was, I caught this turtle, and then you've got this angry snapping turtle, and what do you do with that? And kind of like temptation, what do we do once we've caught what we thought we wanted? But that was an experience that happened years ago, but something brought it back to mind the other day, and I thought, I could do that. I could use that. I think people like some kind of personal anecdote if they can have it, something that connects with them.
Something that tells them about you.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll start with Scripture. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes I'll have a passage that I found very meaningful that week and think, all right, what can I do to illustrate that? And sometimes it'll go that direction.
We are a multi-faith, multicultural community now, perhaps more so than when you started this. The messages are unabashedly Christian because you're a Christian preacher. But do you think about that?
All the time. I try to, I never want to present an offensive gospel. When I present the love of Christ or the story of Christ, I want to do it in a way that's an inviting, welcoming, others to think about it and not ever trying to repel people. I'm never going to do like a turn or a burn or get right or get left. You got to think this way or you're wrong. That's not where I am. So again, I would rather just celebrate the things we have in common and talk about the goodness of God and love of Christ and try to do it in a way that even someone who's non-Christian can think, okay, that was meaningful. That was a good thought. I'm not offended by that. I may not agree with that, but I'm not offended by that. But yeah, that's very much in the forefront of my mind every time. It's like, how do I keep this very Christian oriented, but at the same time make it a welcome message as well?
We'll be right back. I assume you come from a family of preachers.
I do. My father was pastor of First Baptist Rome, Georgia, for 35 years. Dad still lives there. Turned 94 yesterday.
Oh, wonderful.
Mom and Dad had a great life together. Mom died about 2 years ago. So they were married 68 years, if you can believe that. But
yeah. He
was in that church, and before that he pastored a church in Atlanta, and before that Selma, Alabama, which was an interesting time in the late 50s to be connected there. But Dad, Baptist pastor at heart, and so I grew up in that tradition, in that home, and really had a head start into ministry, I think, by having done that, because I knew the ins and outs. I knew how the sausage was made. I knew how to deal with folks, and the idea of public speaking was just something that was just as natural to me as anything. So I really enjoyed that.
Was your dad a great orator?
He was, and really kind of in the old Baptist tradition, where anchored to the pulpit, but still very, very animated and very well prepared, but just a great old-fashioned statesman.
If you had considered a different vocation, what would it have been?
Yeah, very different. I probably would have wanted to be an airline pilot.
Do you fly?
I do. I have a private license. I don't fly very often, but I enjoy flying, and would love to have kind of pursued that. But really, I'm not saying the die was cast early on, but I really felt a sense of call to ministry early on, and so there was never really a big struggle in my life to say, are you going to do something else?
Were you the chosen one among siblings, or did anyone else go that route?
It's interesting. It's just my brother and I, and Dan still lives in Rome, where my dad still lives. Dan went into education and became a college professor, that sort of thing, and never really pursued ministry per se. It was more comfortable kind of behind a desk in front of a group of students. But yeah, a person of great character and integrity, and so we turned out okay, I hope.
Now, what brought you to Nashville?
Woodmont Baptist, yeah.
Woodmont Baptist has a long tradition of well-known pastors,
right,
and a TV ministry.
Right.
How far back?
TV began at Woodmont in 1966, and in that day and age, it was the only show in town. There were only 3 networks at the time, and Woodmont was the only live local broadcast of a television, and that remained in place really probably until just recent history. Now, with the pandemic, made all the churches figure out ways to broadcast and get stuff online and Facebook Live and all that. But really, for all the time I was still at Woodmont, and that was 17 years, we were still the only live local broadcast of a church, of a church service, and so that gave some notoriety. And a lot of folks tuned us in. They called me the sick pastor of Nashville, because when you're homesick, you got me. I don't know if that helped you get well quicker, or maybe, I don't know. But
Dr. Bill Sherman was the longtime pastor.
Bill was there 30 years, and Dr. West had been there before him for 25, I think.
And if my history is correct, Ira North from the Church of Christ in Madison also had a very early broadcast ministry.
That may be true. I don't really know. It's kind of interesting that when you're in it, you kind of stay so siloed in your own denominational structure that, you don't really know what the others are doing. But I think that's true, though. There were some others that had some early attempts at it, but I think we were the only ones to continually have that in place for over 50 years or so.
Did it help grow the congregation?
I think it did initially when TV was still young, and when, again, we were the only kind of show in town. It really put Woodmont on the map, and we became much more of a regional congregation than local congregation, because people knew us, further out than just around the Green Hills area.
And this is pre-megachurch.
That's right.
Right? What do you think of the megachurch model?
You know, good and bad. I think the thing that the megachurch struggles with is whether or not it can build a sense of community with its members. Because I really think that's the heart and soul of most congregations. Do we feel like we belong? Do we feel connected to each other? Are we doing good things together? And in the megachurch, you have greater opportunity. You might have a youth group of 200 or 300 kids who can go on mission trips around the world, who have all kinds of abilities. But you pay for that, in other ways. Maybe you're not as connected as a congregation, or maybe you don't have the close connection to the lead pastor that you might have in a smaller congregation. So I think there's pros and cons to it, to be honest.
And also, the technology, broadcast or streaming or whatever you're going to call it, could place a sort of celebrity temptation on the person in charge. Did that ever worry you?
I think it happens a lot. I think, folks who are in a very popular pulpit that does get a lot of notoriety, you get a lot of ego strokes with that. And I think if you're not careful, that begins to feed into your psyche, and you're like, well, maybe I'm more important than I think I am, And I think it's something you always have to pull back on and just be aware of that. I was good friends with a pastor who was in a mega church in Louisville, and his congregation on Sunday mornings would reach into the thousands, and so he actually had an entourage that would get him from his office to the pulpit every Sunday, and just kind of walled off everybody from getting to him. And I mentioned one day to one of his members that I played golf with him. He goes, "Oh, this pastor?" I said, "Yeah, we play golf from time to time." She said, "Oh, we don't get to talk to him." And I think if you get that big, then I think you're maybe too big. I don't know.
The move to Belmont, what prompted that?
Bob Fisher.
Former president.
Yeah, he was president at the time. I was on the board of trustees. I had been on the board for about 15 years and had kind of watched Belmont really grow and explode and become more than a Baptist college. It became more of an ecumenical kind of reach. And Bob was talking to me one day about a church leadership program that he wanted to begin and never had the right person, right time. And he just looked at me and said, "Would you be interested in doing that?" And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe. I had been at Woodmont for 17 years and was 55 and was thinking, maybe if you're going to change. And it's just a rare opportunity, though, when someone says, "New program, we're going to fund you, here's a blank sheet of paper, go and create something." And I kind of recognized at the time, it's one of those moments that I really probably should seize that opportunity to do that.
That's a gift.
Yeah, absolute gift. So 8 years ago, never dreamed about that. I had been an adjunct at Belmont, and as I said, I had been on the board of trust and had 3 kids that went through there, so I was well acquainted with the Belmont story and the kind of school it was. But just to have that opportunity, try something new, because I always thought, well, if I don't like it, I'll do something different. But now it's 8 years later, and here we are.
And there's another Mike Curb connection there, right?
Yeah. Great story, because we were looking for some endowment money when we started this program. And I went to Mike and talked to him about it. And Mike, if you know Mike at all, Mike is a very authentic and humble individual, even though his name's on, 500,000 things across the world. But I said, "Mike, we want to name this, we've got this faith-based leadership program that we want to begin." And he said, I'm not worthy of that. I don't want to have my name that closely connected to something faith-based, because I don't feel like I'm worthy of having that done. But he had told me often about his grandfather. His grandfather's name was Charlie. Charlie was a circuit riding evangelist in the state of Oklahoma generations ago.
Wow.
And I said to Mike, well, what if we thought about honoring your grandfather's legacy and memory, and what if we named it after him? And instantaneously, Mike,
you're a good salesman, John.
He lit up and thought, that's the point, that's the connecting point. So Mike gave us a gift to begin the program with, and so we named it in honor. So it's the Reverend Charlie Curb Center for Faith Leadership, named after someone I've never met and can't until glory, right? But that's how that came about.
Faith leadership, that means what? Clergy comes there to study, theologians are there. What's going on?
The way the program was designed, it was designed to really help men and women who are in mid-ministry kind of have the contextual tools they need to do ministry in the day and age in which we live. And so it's different from continuing education. It's more about emergency education is the way I like to term it. We do workshops, programs, seminars, courses, really trying to help men and women have the tools in their tool belt they need right now. There's so many things. I graduated with my doctoral work in 1988, and the world's changed since then, right? I felt really well prepared in 1988 to go out and change the world. But you've got just any number of things. You've got LGBTQ, you've got Black Lives Matter, you've got racism, you've got caustic politics, you've got immigration, you've got, it's no end to that list. And all these things are impacting conversations in the local church. And so we were thinking, what can we do to kind of lean into those, to give people just some tools, not that we have all the answers, we don't. So sometimes we'll do guided conversations, sometimes we'll do panel discussions where we'll say, what's working in your context, what's working in yours, what's working in yours, and let's learn from each other, that kind of thing. So the idea is to help men and women be relational to the community, but also relevant to culture. And how do we get that done? So,
are there things that are just completely off the table, or do the conversations get pretty intense?
Part of it is you try to build a safe space, and by doing so, allow people to know you can come and talk and express, and no one here is going to browbeat you, no one here is going to shun you for your belief system, but we're trying to get through this together. So nothing's really off the table. Some conversations obviously are easier than others.
Yeah.
We've done a lot in gun violence, and those conversations get real emotional with a lot of folks, and that's been an interesting thing to tackle as well.
You mentioned Belmont moving towards a more ecumenical. What is the status? Because I recall when there was a split, at least a financial split in some way from the Baptist Church.
Yep.
Like, where does it stand now?
Belmont's goal is to be the number one Christ-centered university in the world. So decidedly Christian, but as ecumenical as we can make it. And we want it to be as welcoming and encouraging as we can make it as well. And so Belmont is open to, leadership and staff from different denominations, either different faith traditions as well. So,
so a Jewish faculty person can be employed at Belmont.
That's correct. That's new.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that a tough arm wrestle at the university?
It is, because you go from Baptist to Christian, and then there was fear that, this is a slippery slope, and if you do this, what's going to happen? But what I've tried to express to people when they've asked me about it is to say, welcoming people of other faith traditions at Belmont is not an indictment of our faith. It should be an expression of our faith, because I think the more we understand, the more we relate to each other, the more we encourage each other, the better world we create around us. And I work part of my work in the Curb Center is I lead the Belmont Initiative for Jewish Engagement. So that's a new program about 3 years old. I work with rabbis and congregations across Middle Tennessee in that endeavor. And it's only made me a stronger Christian. It's made me a more informed believer, have a greater appreciation for my own Judeo-Christian roots, and I have wonderful connections now with folks who disagree with on some things but have great agreement with on other things.
Did you have any aha moments when you started talking in deep ways with your Jewish brethren?
Aha, maybe I don't know. I think I had a lot of moments of realization that I felt like this is kingdom work, if I can kind of use that term. In other words, this is more than about me. It's more than about Belmont. It's more about our pursuit of God and His purpose for us. And if I'm really, if I understand Scriptures carefully, woven into both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, the idea is, and Christ Himself said it, everything's summed up in 2 commandments. You love God and you love your neighbor. And that has only helped me to get to that point, right? To understand the complexities and the difficulties sometimes of loving people who believe differently than you do, but knowing that we're called to that task. And I think one of the things that really bothers me about modern American Christianity in particular, when the church kind of decided that kindness no longer mattered, the country got it. And we've become this country filled with a lot of hate-mongering and caustic speech and rhetoric, and people get online and they just send out stuff, don't even think about who they're impacting or who they're hurting. And I think one of the things we've got to do is figure out a way to have civil, rational, decent conversations with people with whom we disagree. How do we pull that ethic back into the psyche?
It's Banner and Company. We'll be right back. Seems to me that politics has not always been in the church.
Right.
But today it's almost in every church.
Yeah.
Is that ever going to be undone?
I hope so. When I grew up in Baptist tradition, there was a very strong sense of separation of church and state.
Right.
And that's kind of gotten eroded, and now people are almost choosing their churches based on how that church affiliates politically. Is it more of a Republican church or is it more a Democratic-leaning church, which is very unfortunate. I don't know. I hope we've reached the breaking point with that, and things will start to moderate a little bit. But it's another election season, and it's going to be another gut punch, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Christian white nationalism is certainly a danger out there, and a lot of people are concerned about that because the name of Christ
right.
is taken in that movement. That's got to be a problem for someone that has devoted their entire life to speaking the good word.
Yeah, I think what I often say to groups is when we shout God and country so quickly and so often, sometimes we get it mixed up and we say God is country. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. I would hope our citizenship binds us together and helps us to live in harmony and peace with each other, but I hope our citizenship doesn't have to have such an impact where our faith communities begin to become separated and angry with each other.
Do you think I don't know what the stats are. Is church attendance up? Are people getting, it seems to be cyclical. Sometimes people are very into gathering and being part of a congregation. Other people are just out there doing their own thing or maybe never want to join.
The fastest growing church demographic in the country right now are those who are leaving the church. They're not leaving their faith. This is a group they often call the dones. They're just done with organized religion because for one reason or another it has failed them. Maybe there's been church hurt or church abuse in their story. Maybe they've gotten too caught up in the politics or whatever it is, but people have left that. They don't want to leave their faith. Faith is still critically important to them, and they want their children to be religiously educated, but they're not sure the local church is the best place for that to happen, which is unfortunate. So all major faith denominations in the U.S. are in decline. And the pandemic kind of disrupted that a little bit, but now that's kind of settled down and everybody's sort of back to that same downward trend. So that non-religiously affiliated group, though, represents now, I think, about 27% of the adult population.
That's big.
It's huge, and it's growing all the time.
When I came to the South, born and raised in Chicago, I was, of course, struck by the church on every corner.
Yep.
And the people that could quote scripture. And I confess, I'm not one of those people.
Right.
Came from a different kind of, liturgical background. Is that continuing on in the South with all the transplants, or is the sort of identity of Southern Christian, Bible-loving person leaving us?
There's a lot of, that's a great question to ask, and I don't know that I have a great answer, but I have been amazed, at least in my lifetime, of what I call the biblical illiteracy that's happened where people just don't know their Bibles like they could or should. And I think that's a dangerous trend. And I go to a lot of different churches. I'm still invited to preach in a lot of places, which is great. But I'm always amazed when you say, all right, get out your Bible and turn to so-and-so. And most people immediately pull out their phone, and they look it up on their phone, which is fine. I mean, you're still reading the same words, but the problem that I see in that is you don't contextually know where that falls in the greater place of Scripture. Is it Old Testament? Is it New Testament? Is it in the Gospel of John? What follows that?
When you've got to page through the whole big book, you get an idea.
So I think that's a little bit dangerous too. And so I don't know what to do with that. I would hope that, and I do think in some circles, a desire to reclaim what does the Bible really say about that, and how can we in an authentic and honest way, discover that without browbeating someone over. Well, it's the way I read it, and you're different, so you can't be right. But we don't know the Bible like we once did, and that's dangerous.
Which Bible do you embrace?
In terms of a translation,
Mm-hmm.
I like the New Living Translation a lot. It's a really well done scholarly approach, and it's got a nice contemporary feel to it. So that's kind of my go-to.
What's the most profound religious experience you might have had? Did you do the Holy Land? Were you in a place where you were just like, I'm feeling it today?
Yeah, I've done those trips. I've made those kinds of I've had those kinds of experiences. I think, as odd as it sounds, for me, the most religious experience that I've had, I think, was in the discipline of weekly read, think, write, pray through, and prepare a message. Because I felt like every Sunday morning I was offering the congregation a gift. Mm-hmm. This is who I am, but this is also what I have been led to think is truth for you this week. And I never insisted that people had to agree with me. I wanted them to hear me. And maybe you don't agree with me on something that I said, but to me, that was the greatest religious experience, in having the opportunity to read, think, and write, and then to proclaim that. I did everything I did in a local church to have that 25 minutes on Sunday morning. You put up with all the committees and all the work behind the scenes, and
Yep.
that was, and there's enough of me. I'm an extreme extrovert and love being in front of audiences, and that was just my real sweet spot. I also have done a lot of writing, and I find a lot of religious expression in doing that and trying to bring truth to pen and put it on paper.
You're putting yourself out there, though. There could be some people that,
Yeah.
Did you ever get any hate mail?
Rarely, but you get some, and it kind of sticks with you. One really interesting story. It's kind of a difficult story. For a while, and I think it was when we were on Channel 2, our services were being broadcast live on Channel 2, it got picked up on the Dish Network, and so people anywhere
That's big, yeah.
could watch us. And I started getting this hate mail from a prisoner in Mexico, and it was just awful stuff. He would write to me and, call me all kinds of names, and I was always grateful there was a whole country and a strong prison gate between the two of us, But, mostly hate mail, not so strong as you would get in some other faith traditions. For example, my good friend Mark Shifton, who was the rabbi at the temple for all those years, I asked him one day, I said, how often do you get hate mail? Because I'm thinking, we're in Nashville, it's an informed, progressive community. I said, how often do you get hate mail? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, every day. He said, we get it every day. He said, it's just a way of life for us. So we've never had anything to that extent, for which I'm grateful.
You must be losing a lot of sleep, like many of us are, over what's happening in the Middle East.
Yeah. It's a very nuanced conversation. You want to obviously condemn any kind of hostility, any kind of terrorism. That's always wrong. But what is the response, and how far does it need to go? And I'm glad people who are wiser than myself are making those kind of choices, because it's a terrible situation. Yeah.
And I some could believe that this is a moment for us to really weigh these very, very difficult questions that are universal.
Yeah. It is a moment in time, and how quickly does it pass, and what is the impact? I just returned last week. We do, part of my programming, we do a rabbi-reverend retreat. So we take 5 of each, and we go over to Charleston and spend most of a week just dialoguing about stuff.
You don't play golf, do you?
Don't play golf, no. We actually sit around a table and have these real deep theological questions, but it's a difficult time, especially to watch people with whom you're now close go through that, and they're conflicted about it, right? I mean, they obviously want to defend the homeland and want to defend Israel, but at the same time, they know that there are people who are losing their lives every day, and is that deserved? And how do you work with that?
Yeah, it's close to me. I grew up in Chicago, but I went to a public school that was 99% Jewish.
Wow.
In Skokie, Illinois, which was, a famous place made famous by, unfortunately, the the Nazis wanted to march there in the 70s. So all of my friends growing up, we got all the holidays off, and I've been to more Seders than most people have. And, I have quite a heart for all the people that I grew up with. And I know I see the debates on Facebook and on social media with my dear friends. Yeah. It's just a tough time all around.
Yeah, I think social media is it's a great tool, but it's a dangerous tool.
Yeah.
People can say anything.
You can hide behind it. So
yeah, and people will text out something before they even think about who does this affect and who's hearing this, who's reading this.
Banner and Company is a production of the new Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Haruch and Andrea Tudhope. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Well, Jon, one of the things we do on our little podcast here is see that fishbowl in front of me?
I do.
Yeah, that contains some questions from previous or future guests.
Okay.
So we have you choose one, kind of like a game, and give it some thought. It will take you probably a split second to answer, but yeah. We don't have a fish, but we do have a palm tree.
Probably good. All right. From A Girl Has No President. Do you ever think about people who don't look like you and if they feel and are safe in Nashville? Very much so. Again, we're called into community, and I think one of the things that blesses a community is when we do consider people who are different from us. Not to plug my book, but I'll plug one of my books. I wrote a book on creating space, and in that book I describe how do you create space for people in your life who are different from you, who think differently, maybe who vote differently, maybe from a different socioeconomic level. And it's a real simple step. The first thing we do is we create physical space. We say, you're welcome into my office, you're welcome to come sit on my front porch, whatever it is. And when you create physical space, that becomes conversational space, where you begin to say, let's talk about stuff. And a lot of times that stays surface level. How's your mom and them, what's the weather doing, how the Titans playing. But sometimes if you talk often enough, then it becomes relational space, which I think is the key that you're trying to create, that space where we relate as friends, but we also understand each other's hurt and problems and pressures. And if you relate long enough, it becomes redemptive space, where I can say, I can help you with that a little bit, or I want to help you with that. I want to be your friend. I want to encourage you. I want to help you have a better experience. So that's kind of how you relate to people who are different. Yeah, it begins with a relationship that begins with just talking. Got to communicate at just whatever level. Just start talking.